shipwrecks are time capsules of human history, and that there is more human history on the bottom of the ocean than in all of the museums on Earth. I was with National Geographic for about 17 years and was the Chief Science and Exploration Officer. And among other things, I was responsible for going out and finding projects, talent, interesting opportunities, and had the chance to go to some amazing places and work with some incredible people. I would walk you through a couple of projects that I was involved in that involved real lost cities. So, next up, you know, virtually every civilization has a story as part of its cosmology about a flood. In Mesopotamia, the Sumerian epic of Gilgamesh was written about 5,000 years ago. It's one of the oldest tales told. And it bears similarities to the story in Genesis. There's this righteous man who's warned about an imminent flood that's going to be unleashed on the earth by these wrathful gods. He builds this large, in this case, circular boat that's reinforced with tar and pitch, carries his relatives, animals, and grain, and after enduring days of storms, like Noah, he releases a bird in search of dry land. And it turns out that there's similar stories that can be found in Greek mythology. There's a Hindu Noah, there's an Incan Noah, a Polynesian Noah. There's even a First Nation version. And, you know, maybe these flood stories have roots in science. There's something called geomythology. That's the study of how these stories and geology could intersect. And so is there a basis, a scientific basis for the story of a great flood? And, you know, flood stories may explain geological phenomena. They were quite common: volcanoes, earthquakes, and other natural events that affected the ancient landscape. And so in the late 90s, 1997, 1998, two geophysicists at Columbia University published what came to be called the Black Sea Deluge hypothesis. And what they proposed was that there had been this catastrophic inflow of Mediterranean seawater into the Black Sea, which at the time was a small freshwater lake, about 7,000 years ago. And that this had occurred because prior to that, beginning about 15,000 years ago, the glaciers, as they're retreating, the melt water from the glaciers came down the plains of Europe. Sea levels were gradually rising, and the Black Sea remained a freshwater lake because of the geography, the topography, but the Mediterranean continued to rise. And so the rising Mediterranean finally spilled over at the Bosphorus. In fact, according to the theory, carved its way through the Bosphorus. And it flooded about 39,000 square miles of land, significantly expanded the north and western part of the Black Sea. And according to the researchers, water poured in each day, the equivalent of 200 times the flow of Niagara Falls. The Bosphorus Valley, according to Ryan and Pittman, the two scientists, roared and surged with water for at least 300 days. So, in other words, it was a flood of biblical proportions. And somebody likely, if they were living in that area, had a bad day, a very bad day. And maybe people told stories that were passed down from generation to generation. Go back a second. So Bob Ballard, again, the underwater explorer who I mentioned a while back, came to us and said he wanted to test that flood hypothesis. He wanted to determine, you know, had there actually been a flood, could we locate the ancient shoreline? And if we could locate the ancient shoreline, could we find evidence of human habitation? It all stood to reason, you know, that there were agricultural-based human settlements in the area and that they may have been flooded. And so set out for the Black Sea. This is the Northern Horizon, the research vessel that Bob was using at the time. And here is one of the ROVs. This was Little Hercules. And using this equipment, we were able to find the shoreline, the ancient shoreline. We were able to find freshwater extinct mollusks that disappeared around 7,000 years ago. So yes, there had been an influx of salt water into a freshwater environment. And yes, there was an ancient shoreline. So the Black Sea had been a small freshwater lake. And now the question was, could we find evidence of human habitation? And so early in the morning, at the beginning of the expedition, several days into it, this anomaly pops up on the side scan sonar. And later that day, I get a message. I'm back in Washington. I have a message that says, we found a village, a very excited voice, structures of wattle and daub extending across a hilly landscape and into a valley. And the team reported that there were artifacts at the site that were clearly well preserved. There were carved wooden beams, there were wooden branches, stone tools collapsed among a mud matrix structure. And it was at 300 feet. So I dropped everything and flew to Turkey, flew to Ankara, and then we had to drive, it's like a 5-hour drive to Sinop, which was the coastal city near where Bob was doing his work. And it's maybe one of the most hair-raising drives on the planet. There are more fatalities on that particular highway than anywhere else on Earth. And when I got there, it was a complete circus. There was just pandemonium. There were hordes of Turkish journalists that had been worked into a frenzy. They even wanted to, they had put together a flotilla of boats and they were trying to board the Northern Horizon. And there were newspaper articles like this, you know, where the artist helpfully drew a picture of an ark. In this story, the newspaper provided images of the village that they thought we had found. So this is what came up on the sonar, and then when the ROVs went down, here's what appears to be a stone chisel. There were stone tools. This one has a hole that had been drilled into it. There were square, rectangular stones that appeared to be, you know, those that might be used on a floor. Here's a mosaic of the site. We didn't see a village. You know, someone got a little carried away with that, like the Turkish journalist. But it does appear that there had been human habitation along this shoreline. And as I said, at the time, if there was a massive influx of water into the area, it likely ruined somebody's day. But in addition to finding, you know, evidence of this human habitation, of confirming that there had been an ancient lake, we also discovered, as a result of the unique environment in the Black Sea, another important thing. So for centuries, men and women have been going to sea, and for centuries this has been happening. Ships have been sinking. It turns out that the Black Sea has this unique environment. It is below about 300 feet. It is completely anoxic. It's devoid of oxygen, which means that anything that's organic is going to be preserved. It's going to survive because, you know, the great enemy of wooden ships, ancient wooden ships, are wood bores. Well, if there's no oxygen, there are no wood bores. If there are no wood bores, the ship is going to be in great shape, as is any other organic material. And on the last day of the expedition, we came across this, and this is a mast sticking straight up of a ship. We took images as well as samples because the archaeologist on board said that, well, you know, this has got to be a ship of recent vintage, maybe 200, 300 years old. Look at how perfectly preserved it is. You can see here the cut marks on the wooden beams. Well, it turns out that the ship was not 200 or 300 years old, that it was more than 1,500 years old. It was a Roman Byzantine vessel, and it had been sitting on the bottom of the Black Sea for all that time, and it looked like it had just rolled out of the shipyard. And, you know, Bob always liked to say that shipwrecks are time capsules of human history, and that there is more human history on the bottom of the ocean than in all of the museums on Earth or on dry land.